Back in 2016, DC began the DC Rebirth Initiative. This initiative is a way for DC to not just bring back the feel of the pre-New 52 continuity, but it's also a way for DC to bring in new readers and maybe get the old ones back. It was a success, both critically and financially, dominating the sales charts and has received a lot of critical praise from a lot of the titles they were putting out at the time. We will not be talking about the entire initiative for this video. In this, we'll be talking about one book from that initiative that most readers probably forgotten about, and surprisingly is also the comic that got me into buying monthly comics, and also my reintroduction to Batman, and that comic was All-Star Batman. I think some of you might be thinking, isn't that the crap Batman comic from Frank Miller, the one where Batman tells Robin that he's the I'm the goddamn Batman, and the other ridiculous nonsense from that book. And my answer to that is no, it's not. It's the one that was released in 2016, part of the DC Rebirth era, and was written by Scott Snyder. From what I remember correctly, this comic came about because Scott wanted to tell more stories involving the other classic Bat villains that are not named the Joker. By the by, he writes a pretty terrifying Joker. Anyways, this was a way for Scott to take the classic rogues into new territories, and also a way for Scott to, take Batman out of Gotham for a while. Which, in my opinion, that idea of his, it was executed beautifully. To be honest, it's kinda hard for me to write this review, because I love Batman, ever since I first saw him in Justice League the Animated Series. Also, this comic will always have a special place in my geeky heart, so I'll try my best to remain as objective as possible, because as I said, this was also my reintroduction to the character. By the by, I will be just touching on some parts that I love and somewhat dislike in each arc, because I'm too lazy to, do a super in-depth review. For the first and last arc, I will review them as a whole. For the second arc, I will be reviewing each issue. You'll see why when we get to it. The Duke Thomas storyline, I will cover that. The backup story that was happening in issues 10 to 14, I will not, because they're not written by Scott. Quick review. It was fun because it shows us what what goes into Bruce's mind when he's investigating, disguising as someone. That's typical Batman stuff, but it's well written. But the real kicker here was Sebastian Fiumara's artwork. Gorgeous. But enough about that. Let's dig into. This comic opens in a diner where there are country folks just eating their breakfast and talking to the people who run the place. Then suddenly Firefly, no, not the show, and Killer Moth comes crashing through the diner's window and tosses Batman to the floor. What I like about this opening is this is basically Scott saying, hey, remember my run in New 52? Yeah, this is gonna be crazier than that one. He sets the mood that, yeah, this is gonna be way different from his New 52 run. I mean, that's what this first arc is in a nutshell. It's Scott taking Batman and Two-Face out of Gotham to tell a wild, crazy, but still personal story. It's about Bruce not giving up on Harvey, even if it cost him his life and his identity. That's who Batman is, and Scott nailed that aspect of the character. But aside from that aspect, this arc is just crazy fun. It has a lot of cameos from other Bat villains. They range from the recognizable rogues to the more obscure ones like Cheshire, the female Copperhead, Killer Croc, Amygdala, King Shark, Tweedledee and Tweedledum, the Gentleman Ghost, the Black and Whites, and the KG Beast, which, by the way, this was my introduction to the badass that is the KG Beast. Scott just knows how to write big, hulking, intimidating characters, and I love it. KG Beast is terrifying in this story. He gave Batman a run for his money in this. And that opening fight scene in issue 3, oh man, it was beautiful and was presented beautifully by artist John Romita Jr., which we will talk about his art right now. It was nasty, and it works. It blended well with the story that Scott is trying to tell in this book. The bruised up faces, the blood, the broken bones. It's just beautiful. Also, the pacing. It's wild, as it should be. Well, it does slow down on the Bruce Harvey Duke scenes, and it works because the characters get some time to breathe, even though they are in this crazy ass situation. I could go on and on and on with how much this comic is just crazy fun, but I'll end it here because we still have two more volumes to discuss. Overall, this comic is wild, but still has a lot of heart because the heart of this story is Bruce's dedication to helping his childhood friend, even if it cost him his life and identity. Give this arc a read, guys. Now, let's move on to the next volume, which is... Oh yeah, Duke also has a backup story for these first two arcs. Okay then, let's dig into The Cursed Wheel, parts 1 to 4. This backup story was fun. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed Duke's character in this. I love how he reacts to a lot of Bruce's antics. I love that he is somewhat distinct to the other characters from the Bat family. I mean, he's just a intelligent kid from the Narrows who just happens to be picked by Batman to be his next ally. And we see how he is under Batman's tutelage. That's all good stuff. But the stuff with Zaz is just terrifying. I mean, this was also my introduction to Zaz as a kid. He's pretty terrifying in this. I'll end it on this, but that's my thoughts on Duke's first backup story from this run. Now, let's move on to the actual next arc of this run.
Can't escape me! I'll chase you to the ends of the earth!
I couldn't help myself. But yes, this story puts the spotlight on some of the Cape Crusader's greatest adversaries, as he races across the globe to stop a cataclysmic threat. What I love about this arc is all 4 issues, yes, this ran from issues 6 to 9, nice, of this run, is that Scott tells 4 unique and intriguing stories involving Mr. Freeze, Poison Ivy, Mad Hatter, and Ra's al Ghul. They all feel different from one another, which is great because I think anyone can jump into an issue of this story arc without reading the prior issues of the said story arc. Sure, there's still the virus that Mr. Freeze unleashed going on in the background, but each story just feels like a one-shot to me. So yeah, I will be reviewing each issue for this arc rather than, review the entire, volume. So let's go. The first issue with Mr. Freeze was haunting and brilliantly executed by Scott Snyder and Jock. Yes, the team who did Batman, Black Mirror. The one with Dick Grayson as Batman. The vibe I got with this issue reminds me of their horror comic, Witches. Another good Scott Snyder comic that I recommend you all read. This comic has Mr. Freeze, who is threatening to destroy an ice core that contains a long dormant bacteria. Freeze is flanked by an army of followers, all of whom were cryogenically frozen and now indebted to Freeze for waking them again. With the bacteria, the Earth will be erased of all organic life, allowing Freeze and his army of formerly frozen followers free reign. This issue was haunting and pretty fun, but the best part of this issue is Scott finally brought Mr. Freeze's original purpose. Because if you remember in Batman Annual #1 from the New 52, Scott turned Mr. Freeze into a stalker. I'm not joking. Instead of Victor and Nora being married, Scott simply turned Freeze into a stalker. Hell, Nora was way older than Victor in that annual, for Christ's sakes. Thank goodness he somewhat retconned that aspect, because it's just, ugh. Overall, this issue was fun, haunting, and just beautiful. Beautiful to look at. Okay, next issue. The next issue is, I think, the best issue of this arc. This Poison Ivy story is brilliant because Scott and artist Tula Lottai showed that Ivy is still good. Sure, she may have committed a ton of crimes, being an eco-terrorist and all, with superpowers, might add, but she still has a heart of gold. 10 out of 10 for this issue. Next issue, let's go! The next one is about the Mad Hatter and maybe the Blackhawks capturing Duke. And Batman has to go through a psychedelic trip through Mad Hatter's, mind machine thing. I literally forgot what it's called. Yeah. Anyways, Scott and artist Giuseppe Camuncoli really nailed the trippiness of Mad Hatter's machine? Seriously, comment down below on what it's called. It slips me as of this moment. It's trippy and very fitting for the character of Jervis. Also, Scott paying attention to continuity. He mentions the events of his New 52 run in this issue, which is awesome. Overall, I had fun with this issue, and I think it sets up the finale pretty well. Now, let's move on to... This issue is kind of hard to break down, but I'll try my best in summarizing it. This issue finally reveals who tried to unleash the bacteria, the guy who captured Duke and hired the Blackhawks. Blackhawks. With, bunny ears. Ra's al Ghul. Okay, what I like about this issue. Ra's calling Bruce Bruce. Just Bruce. It's kind of jarring at first, but I think, Ra's reasoning, it worked for me. The narration I thought was pretty good. That's typical for Scott Snyder. Selina helping Bruce out I thought was a fun twist. And Jock doing the art. That's all good. Now, let's move on to the stuff that I didn't like. This one still bothers me. Bruce surviving a freaking headshot. Like, even the reason of him surviving was very vague and super weird and jarring. Just, yeah, this is kind of weird. But overall, this was fun. This issue was fun. This whole arc was fun because Scott really got to experiment with his way of telling stories. Not just, regular stories, but Batman stories. Okay, now let's move on to Duke's final story in this run. The Cursed Wheel, parts 5 to 8. This story just continues on what Scott was doing with the first one. It's about Duke finding his place in the Bat family. Duke's unsure of what role he is going to play in the Bat family. It's well done, and you really feel what Duke was feeling in this story. While that's going on, the Riddler is also doing his annual celebration, by using, traps. Smaller scale this time, because, the last time Scott's Riddler, used traps, it nearly destroyed the city. Then, another plot point that's happening in this comic was, the stuff with Daryl, Duke's friend in the New 52. Yeah, if you don't know, this guy made Mr. Bloom. Well, allegedly made Mr. Bloom. Him and Duke's conflict in this too was, very well done, and you really feel that broken friendship that they have. And after all that, at the end of the story, Scott sets up a mystery, involving Duke. And that will be followed up on in Dark Knight's The Forge. Oh yeah, I almost forgot to mention that Francesco Francavilla's art in this is gorgeous. He really knows how to play with the pacing, with just his lines. It's fantastic. Overall, the story was a good setup for the future of Duke Thomas, and a good character-centered story involving Duke. Okay, now let's move on to Scott's final story in this run, and that is... This comic took me by surprise, to be honest, because I was expecting this to be like the rest of the previous arcs. The first two arcs was presented in Bruce's point of view, which, by the way, those arcs are excellent. Nothing wrong with those two arcs. But for this one, it's presented in Alfred's point of view, which, as I said, took me by surprise. I can tell that Scott loves Alfred because he writes him like if he was Bruce's father. And I love that. But aside from the heart of the story itself, I thought was fun too. It gave them Court of Owls vibes, minus the, history of the city stuff. This story is about Alfred's old mentor, Briar, coming back to get the Genesis engine. It's not just Briar and his knight that are coming to get the Genesis engine. The Black and Whites and Hosh also teamed up to get it. The stuff with Alfred's past was also well told. His time in the military and in MI5 was explored pretty well by Scott. And we get to see that Alfred is like Bruce in some shape or form back when they were young. I also love the parallels that Scott made between Briar and Alfred's relationship and Bruce and Alfred's relationship. It's very well executed. Before I wrap up my thoughts in this arc, I just want to say that Rafael Albuquerque crushes it on the artwork. The emotions, the action, just everything about his art on this arc is fantastic. He's always been an awesome artist, but I think this is where he cemented himself as one of the best Batman artists. And now, one of my favorite artists for, not just Batman, but in comics in general. Because his style is just so unique and dynamic. And I love it. Overall, this arc was awesome. And is easily one of my favorite Batman stories ever. Overall, this run was fantastic. It has all of Scott's strengths on display. The artwork is fantastic on all of them. And every storyline is well written. Well, minus a few hiccups. Hopefully my raving enticed you to check out this run, because in my opinion, this run needs more love from Batman and, DC readers. Hopefully y'all enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you haven't, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next video. Take care.